In my last video, I totally missed the whole point. I said I would compare Italy versus France and tell you why we chose France. But I had technical difficulties and lost that whole section of film where I explained. So in this video, I'm going to show you all the things in Florence that we did. Well, not all the things, that would take forever. And show you some of the beautiful photos we took and how much we loved it. After I show you the rest of our time in Florence, I'm going to share with you a chart that I created. It's not perfect. However, it gives a good little overview of the differences between the visa process and how much money you need in Italy as opposed to what you need in France. I will be using euros. I will not be translating euros to dollars. The exchange rate changes almost daily. So if you want to know what the euros that I'm saying in the chart translate to in dollars, just go to Google and say, or 31,000 euros to dollars, to US dollars, and it'll tell you. It'll give you the exchange of the day. Usually it's pretty up to date. So let's get started. And hey, shout out to the two people who said, hey, you told us you were going to do this and I didn't see it. Did I miss something? Yeah, you missed a whole section of tape that pooped out on me. Before we get into the nitty-gritty and the money end of things, I just want to show you a few more things that we got to do when we were in Florence. We started our trip with our first cup of cappuccino in Italy, and we immediately noticed the change in cultures between France and Italy. As many of you know who have watched more videos on France, in France, when you go have a cappuccino or have a breakfast or something of that nature, you sit down, you enjoy it. You sip your coffee or espresso or your Americano, and you maybe have a French style breakfast, which usually consists of bread, confiture, which is jam, and possibly a pat of butter. Sometimes the bread is baguette, sometimes it's toast, and sometimes it's croissant. But the point in French culture is to sit and to sip it and to enjoy it. When we got to Italy, we went into the cafe that we found near our Airbnb after we got settled in, and immediately found that there was only one table in this little coffee house. And it was empty. So we ordered at the counter and decided to take them and sit down and look out the window and just watch people go by. But what was going on inside was more interesting to me than what was going on outside. Because in Italy, usually the Italians aren't sitting down, savoring, etc. They're standing at a counter. They go in, they order their cappuccino or their coffee. They might have a newspaper. They might have somebody else with them. They chit chat or they read the paper, drink their coffee standing, and then bye. They start their day. So that was really interesting to note. And we didn't get anybody giving us dirty looks or anything, but we could tell that people knew that because we were sitting down at the table, we were tourists. After our coffee, it was off to explore the bridge called the Ponte Vecchio, which translates to Old Bridge. It's famous for its shops, which seem to be these days mostly jewelers. And these shops are built directly on the bridge itself. I even know that there are a few apartments above these shops on this bridge because when we were looking for an Airbnb to stay in Florence, one of those popped up. It was a little too pricey for our price range. If you're ever in pub trivia and need to know, historically, this bridge originally housed butchers and blacksmiths before becoming known for goldsmiths and jewelers. It is Florence's oldest bridge and was the only bridge not to be destroyed during the German retreat in World War II. The bridge was very interesting. I wasn't looking for jewelry, but it was also very crowded. It was the beginning of tourist season, right in the first week of June. We decided to get off that bridge and go to a different pedestrian bridge down the river a little bit so we could take pictures of that bridge from a distance, and it was way less crowded. After that, we just strolled the streets of the city, and I, of course, took far too many photos of everything I saw, all the buildings, all the things. We really enjoyed wandering the side streets, as they weren't as full as the space around the Duomo. That building was impressive. We didn't pay to see the inside of it or climb the stairs in there or anything of that nature. But the outside was impressive enough, despite the crowds of people. By later in the afternoon, I was starting to feel like I needed to sit down. Remember, I was suffering from plantar fasciitis. So, while standing right in front of the Duomo, I looked across the plaza, and there, like a beacon of green light, was an Irish pub. Nothing like sitting and having a cold pint while staring out the big doorway at the Duomo. That was an interesting blend of culture. Another good piece of trivia, in case you do pub nights sometimes and it ever comes up. In Florence, the Duomo refers to the Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore. And yeah, I was reading that off a piece of paper. The city's primary cathedral and renowned for being an architectural landmark as well. I thought that that building, in my ignorance back then, I didn't know a lot of Italian history. I thought that Duomo just referred to that place, to that building. But I was wrong. A Duomo in Italy is any church that functions also as a cathedral. So the big cathedral in Milan is a Duomo. The word itself literally means house of God. So if you didn't know, now you know. After another wonderful meal at the restaurant we went to every single night in Florence, because it was so good and it was a few steps from our Airbnb. The next day we decided was museum day. We really wanted to see Michelangelo's David up close and personal. We found that it was housed a bit north of the Duomo area in the Accademia Gallery of Florence. Once inside, we were not disappointed. I knew it was big, but I did not even understand how massive it is when you're standing under it. The platform he stands on alone is higher than your head, but the sculpture itself is huge. There had to have been a huge trellising structure for Michelangelo to even be able to carve that thing. Anyway, we took a lot of photos, and I was really happy to see several budding artists sitting off to the side on a bench and sketching it. If you don't know, I'm also an artist, and I'm getting ready to run a community of women who are 45 plus, little mini advertisement here, who want to recreate their lives through sketching and art journaling and maybe even moving abroad like I am. So David was ginormous. And then there was another off side gallery, like a big giant hallway gallery with tons of other plaster casts and marble sculptures and all of that kind of stuff. It was beautiful and well worth visiting. I would recommend, if you're traveling to Florence, find either online to print out or find somewhere that has a map of the streets that specifically shows you all of the sites and museums and places that you want to see, because they are scattered about. And while everything is walkable, some things are much further than you think that they're going to be. They're not all clustered together in one part of the old city. After that, we headed back to the Arno River, which is the river that runs through Florence. We were going to go to the Uffizi galleries. I think that's how you pronounce it. Uffizi? Correct me if you know. And when we got nearby, lo and behold, there was another David sculpture outside of that gallery area. It was still really big, but not nearly as gigantic as the one we'd seen before. However, the lines of people waiting to get into the gallery. There were so many people in line that it wound down to the river and around the block. And as we followed around to see how long the line was, and it wasn't moving very fast either, I just gave up on my desire to see Botticelli's Venus because I didn't want to stand for hours in that line in the heat. Finally found some heat on this trip. So we just kept on walking past the end of the line around the side, and that was when we found the most incredible museum ever. It was something that we didn't even know existed, and it had no line. Just down from the end of the line of people waiting to get into the Uffizi, there was a side corner doorway. We found the Galileo Museum. This museum was formerly known as the Museum of History and Science. We walked right in, paid a very low fee, and had an incredible experience wandering through to see all of Galileo's telescopes, all of these things. We were looking at one of the largest displays of scientific equipment ever gathered. They were works of art themselves. So I wasn't disappointed that I'd missed the Uffizi. Some of those big round things that had all the turning parts inside. I don't know what that's called, but it was way cool. Honestly, walking around the streets of Florence felt like we were in a giant museum. And we got to come across a lot of interesting people, including this man playing an accordion.
I'll put some money in his cup.
You said you did or you wrote?
I will. See what I got here. Pull that €2 coin out.
Grazie.
And he was enjoying it so much and seemed to be playing for the crowd regardless of what he got in return. But there was a little cup in front of him and it did not have coffee in it. So I spent a minute fishing around for coins so I could throw a couple euro in there because he entertained us. It was cheerful and nice, and we enjoyed his little concert. Okay, so let's take a break from all the pretty pictures and talk about what I didn't end up talking about in my last video due to technical issues. While we enjoyed our trip to Italy, we did keep it on our list of places we would like to retire to one day, there are several reasons that we have ruled it out as a place we want to be. Let me get my handy dandy chart up. Again, be aware that euro to dollar ratios fluctuate a lot. So I'm only showing euros. What I want to look at today is the visa process and banking. I'm going to focus mostly on the long stay visitor visas for both countries, like the retirement visas, and focus on those because that's what many people use to move. I myself will be applying for a profession liberale visa, probably in France, so I can bring my business with me. My husband may get a work visa. It depends on if he gets work for a company within France or outside of there. This visa, the visitor visa, I think it's TS in France. I don't know what it's actually called in Italian in Italy, but they're similar in their scope. So I made this little chart and I'm going to try to extend it the whole time we're talking about it and keep it right here so you'll be able to see as I go along and talk about each step. Okay, let's look at the first line. This is the amount of money that you were a couple years ago to have had in the bank in an Italian bank as a single person and then as a couple. 31,000 euro for one person and then 7,000 additional euro for each additional person coming with you. However, a couple years ago, I guess, it's only been a little over a year, I suppose, a couple who had already bought a home in Italy were denied by the consulate because they only had about 45,000 euro in the bank. They thought this would be enough since they were only required to have 38. The consulate denied them their visa application and told them that they needed to have 31,000 euro each in the bank. So that was 62,000 euro total. That is crazy town, people. And if you want to see how devastating that news was to people, check out the Europats, where Diane and Matt, who were planning on retiring to Italy, had to go through the grieving process and change their plans. Now, since that time, a few things have happened. The couple has appealed, and the courts found them to be in the right. In fact, the courts said it was utterly ridiculous that the consulates were trying to require them to have that amount apiece. However, it looks like the amount is still a little bit different than it was before. It really just depends on the website you see. Some still require 31,000 euro for the first person and 7,000 for the second. But some others now are saying the requirement is 31,000 euro for the first person and 14,000 euro for each additional person. It just depends on where you go, which is part of the problem. So it's still higher than my chart suggests. So that is strike one. And I hope you can't hear things in the background. My husband's up in the front of the house in his office, and it's still, I can hear things loudly. I hope that you can't. I'm going to move the mic over a little bit so it's not pointing that direction. So that is strike one, the ever-changing landscape of Italian bureaucracy and consulate requirements. The numbers on the French side, too, I think are set to go up somewhat in 2026, but they're consistent because they're based on French minimum wage. So it stays pretty consistent with that thought process. Now let's look at line 2, banking. Again, I guess. Across Italian consulates, depending on where you're applying from, the amount you're required to have in the bank varies widely. It fluctuates between that 31,000 euro and even 60,000 euro for one person. So it's not consistent across the board. How is anyone supposed to be able to deal with that? This makes it very difficult for people who plan to retire down the road to plan ahead. In France, they usually require 1 to 2 years of living costs depending on your visa. For the retirement visitor visa in Italy, again, I don't know what it's called, so I'm just using the French words. For that visa, you are not allowed to work online or offline. All of your income must be passive. That means you must be getting it from your retirement, your 401k, your Social Security, a pension, any of those things, but you cannot be making an income inside or outside of Italy that's not that passive income. For a visitor visa in France, and you also need passive income if you're retired. However, and this is where I want you to consult with a professional and not listen to these armchair warriors all over Facebook and the internet and YouTube, etc., trying to tell you that you can't work at all on a visitor TS visa. That is not true. On this visa, you're not allowed to work for anyone inside of France because that means you're taking jobs away from French people and from EU residents, and they are prioritized. But you can have digital or remote work from a non-French company, or if you have your own income coming from online sources. I will be consulting with an attorney to make sure that knows on the France side that knows those requirements, to make sure that I will either need to get, I'm sure I will need to get a profession liberale visa because I'll be bringing business to France in the form of retreats, and I'll be making all my money as a self-employed person. Anyway, as I said, hire a reputable lawyer to make sure you're getting the correct visa for your needs, especially if you want to work remotely or have all of your business online. Or for that kind of visa in Italy, nothing. You cannot work remotely. You cannot have online money coming in. It has to be passive. For housing, France and Italy are both pretty much the same. You must show that you have a lease to rent a place at long term. And now you can actually show that you have a short-term lease in the beginning as long as you have an address, and then you need to immediately find a longer-term place once you're there if you don't already have one. So you can have a permanent address, but you must show a lease or show that you own your property there. Insurance requirements in both Italy and France are that you must have at least 1 year of private insurance paid in full up front to be allowed to live in the country. Most of these you can find for pretty decent amounts, especially if you're American and you're used to paying like $800 a month for 2 people to be on health insurance and still having to pay ginormous amounts of copays. Usually it's under $2,000 a year for each person, but you will need that money up front. The last line is a repeat, but it's the main reason that we decided on France as where we wanted to be and not on Italy. Italy's consulate rules are all over the place. It depends on the consulate. It depends on the whim of wherever district you're in, whatever mayor you have. So you can't count on Italy being consistent, and you can't plan ahead because the rules could change at any time. Also, their bureaucracy is very slow. I hear people getting frustrated because they think that French bureaucracy is slow. They got nothing on Italy. France does make things much more clear, and it bases your income requirements on the French minimum wage. So that makes it much easier to calibrate what you're going to need up front to be able to immigrate. This is the first of several reasons that we decided that France was more appropriate for us. Now, there may be many people whose hearts are set on Italy, and I say go for it. We just found that it was much more difficult to try to plan or to try to think about things because we're not wealthy. And we will be working. If you found some of this information valuable or just entertaining, hit that like and subscribe for more videos. Keep an eye out for my next video, which should be coming out Saturday. My next video, I'll talk about our tour of Tuscany and some of the things we learned about booking tours. I'll talk a little bit about an injury I had due to an overbooked tour group and a guide who was rushing us as a result. And I'll also talk about another reason we chose France, even though we found Italy beautiful and wonderful, and my dream was always like, oh, I would live in a Tuscan village. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'll see you in the next one.